Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. This video is about the Jewish community all around the world. So how many Jewish people are there in the globe? Well, there are various estimates, and it can be as low as 15 million, it could be as high as 20 million, it could be rather higher than that, depending on how stringent one's definition of what a Jewish person is. There have been various surveys which are done, and the Haredim, for instance, are very loath to participate in these studies for reasons I don't quite understand. They tend to keep Gentile society at arm's length and be very inward-looking, isolated, even somewhat isolated from the mainstream Jewish community, because they want to live a very pure and religious life, concentrating almost exclusively on their faith and not being distracted by worldly concerns. Anyhow, there's a halakhically Jewish definition, and you may know that traditionally Judaism is seen as matrilineal. It goes through your mother. So the idea being that in the old days, a man couldn't be absolutely certain if a child was his, because this is before DNA testing and all that. So he didn't know whether his wife had a paramour, and he could have been cuckolded. So someone who's born to a Jewish mother and a Gentile father would count as a Jewish person. But what if it was just a Jewish grandmother who was fully Jewish and the rest were not? The other three grandparents were not. Well, that person would still be Jewish. So it could get a bit silly if someone was regarded as a Jewish person only because his mother's 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 mother was fully Jewish and he wasn't brought up in the faith, but that's it. I once saw Elvis Schmelvis perform at Simcha 2008. Simcha's like celebration, took place on Trafalgar Square in London. And he's the world's only Jewish Elvis impersonator. And he said on this basis, Elvis Presley must be regarded as a Jewish man, since it came down through his mother's line, even though he's not brought up in the Judaic religion and all the rest of it. Anyway, I'm not Jewish at all, so far as I'm aware. I like to think I'd be like Christopher Hitchens if I were to suddenly discover that I had a Hebraic ancestor. That would have absolutely zero effect on my beliefs and attitudes towards anything, anyone, the Israel-Palestine dispute, and so on, because I try and figure out the rights and the wrongs of things from first principles, try to be fair-minded, I strive for objectivity, difficult I know, try not to be prejudiced towards my own people, whomever I regard those to be. At the same time, try not to be prejudiced against them. Some people try so hard to be balanced, they actually be balanced against their own lot. Anyway, so I think that Jewish people should be optimistic and inclusive about who counts as a Jewish person. Every Jewish birth is one small victory against genocide. I suppose I'm obliged to mention the Holocaust to underscore yet again that I believe in this. Because when I discuss other issues, people say, oh, you're like one of these Holocaust deniers, which could not be further from the case. I met a Holocaust survivor who was a Moldovan who moved to Canada. I met Jimmy James, who spent some time in Sachsenhausen concentration camp. Not that he was a victim of the Holocaust, but he saw people there who were, over 100,000 people, murdered in Station Z. Z as in end of the alphabet, end of the line. That's where people were systematically shot. And I've stood on the concrete foundations of that building. It's been destroyed since. So Jimmy James was there while that's what was happening. He wasn't killed. He was a British RA officer and a Gentile, but he attested that it happened. Because in the 1940s, in only 3 years, almost half the Jewish population of the planet was wiped out. Obviously, Jewish people are very worried that there could be a recrudescence of this sort of thing, and obviously after the Second World War, most European Jews who survived left, largely moved to Israel, some to the United States, further afield, and thinking, well, we've got to do absolutely anything to ensure our survival. Even if that means being unethical or doing something illegal, we've got to do it, because the Palestinians or other Arabs, they're not going to be wiped out. They can go to another Arab country. We've got nowhere left, and that's why Israel's supposed to be in Athens, has turned into a Sparta, as a friend of mine said. Now, I know it is very culturally advanced and very prosperous, but also is armed to the teeth. Now, to some extent, because it has to be, but also because it's occupying most of the West Bank. So if some Jewish people would agree with me, saying, yeah, come on, let's open our arms to people who are only a quarter or an eighth Jewish and so forth, even through their father, and we can include them. So then the Jewish population of the world will be something up to 40 million. Obviously, Judaism doesn't proselytize, but it does accept converts. It's quite reluctant to do so. It doesn't mean some of the Jewish people that they can't be entirely trusted. And one of my friends, she's Jewish on her father's side, but she's scintillated by the Anglo Jewry as a sort of sociological phenomenon, not the faith so much, but identity, a bit like I am, degrees of assimilation, degrees of isolation. And she says if you converted to Judaism and you went to some Orthodox group and they were going to get married, they would encourage you to marry another convert. Not quite sure why. Perhaps because you've been through a similar experience. That would give you a lot of common ground. But what if no Jewish woman had had an abortion since the Holocaust? What would the Jewish population of the world be then? Rather higher. Forget the sort of 20 million, the most optimistic estimate of people who are kind of halakhically Jewish. Higher than that, would it be 30 million, something like that? All the babies who were born, say, in the 1950s who wouldn't otherwise have been born, and all their children who had been born in the 1980s who wouldn't otherwise have been born, and things like that. And the Jewish population of the world has only just about now recovered from the Holocaust. So that's that. So I'm saying that if they counted everyone who had even a drop of Jewish blood in their veins, it'd be 40 million. I mean, that's another fascinating question. Is it an ethnicity? Is it a faith? I mean, well, you can look into DNA, and whilst most Jewish people are very distantly related to each other, they've obviously wandered around the globe and intermarried with people of so many different races. They're Falasha Jews who lived in Ethiopia for centuries, and unsurprisingly, they're black. And then the European Jews tend to have very little melanin. Some Jewish people having dark hair, Jewish people having red hair. Is there a Jewish look? Not really. There's some people who could be said to look Jewish, others who are completely Jewish who are not said to look it. There's some Gentiles who said, well, you could consider this person to look Jewish. So apparently European Jews have most in common with Mediterranean peoples like Italians in their DNA. I mean, unsurprisingly, as they pass through the Mediterranean quite a lot. There are Jewish people in India and likewise in China, and of course they intermarried with the indigenous people of those countries. So that's that. Jewish people are perennially fascinating for their extraordinary contribution to the intellectual life of the world, in terms of literature, theatre, cinema, politics, and so forth. Now, it's difficult to quantify accomplishments in terms of literary achievement, because these things are so subjective. It's simply a matter of taste, as what counts as a riveting an artful novel, or what's a magnificent significant poem, whereas in the hard sciences it's a bit more objective. You can really quantify what's worthwhile work. I can't, because I know zilch about science. But nonetheless, the contribution of the Jewish community, particularly the Ashkenazim, to learning all around the globe has been completely out of proportion to their tiny percentage of the world's population. Like, is it something like 0.2% of the world's population they are? I don't know what percentage of world Nobel Prize winners they are, but far, far higher. So they are an extraordinary and scintillating people. Right, that's that.